My role in IBM is I look after all our advertising here in the UK. I'm also responsible for our digital strategy and our customer centres in the UK, a handful of other things. This afternoon, I'm going to talk a little bit about real-time marketing, or rather a journey towards real-time marketing, or to be truthful, a journey towards real-time analysis of the data coming out from marketing campaigns to help improve the performance of those marketing campaigns. But before I get into that, let's just try and set just a little context. I owe Neil tuppence because he's referred to IBM's CMO study already. But last year, as we saw, we interviewed 1,700 CMOs, largest study of its time, and what those CMOs told us, that I think we probably already know, is that the key things that the CMOs are worrying about are the explosion in data, what they're going to do around social media, the explosion in channels and devices, etc. But then in the same survey, we asked them, which are the ones that you're least prepared for? It's the same list. Data, social media, growth in channels. So data is very, very much at the heart of this whole thing, and our profession, we all know, is being transformed by data. It used to be, I was talking to someone over lunch, it used to be that the data teams in our organisations were the guys who we sort of kind of kept locked in a cupboard in the corner. But I think in recent years, we've seen it's far, far too important for that, and we need to bring the data guys out into the sunlight, as it were, and really integrate them properly with the rest of the marketing operation. So, in my view, though, I think we're really struggling to make use of the data that's already there and available to us, let alone before we get the onslaught of all the new social streams of data and all this other stuff. So it's only going to get more challenging. So somehow or another, we need to start getting our heads around it. So if data is transforming our function, I think we all need to start developing some new competencies. So for a while, I've talked about this notion of a marketing scientist. I see that as a scientist is someone who's informed by data, who forms hypotheses, who creates experiments to test those hypotheses, who measures it, adjusts the theory, etc., etc. And it's really a never-ending journey. It's one of continual iteration. And I think these sort of scientific principles really need to become much more the norm in our work. We are really, I think, in marketing, in the business of understanding behaviour. And behaviour generates data and potential insight. The tools, of course, that the scientists might use might be many and different. It may be, at one extreme, it might be a flask and a Bunsen burner. At another extreme, might be the Large Hadron Collider. So the tools is not the issue, in my view. It's much more about the mindset. Funnily enough, this picture, the first time I used it a few years ago, somebody said, "What is that in that flask?" I think I responded, the answer isn't, what is it? The question is, whose is it? But anyway, I think, unfortunately, many of us, though, today are still trapped in this world of the factory production notion of marketing, where, let's get another campaign off the line as quickly as possible, as efficiently as possible, so that we can move on and produce another campaign and get that one off the production line. So, we just can't keep going on this more and more, faster and faster, cheaper and cheaper notion. I think the issue for us is not actually the quantity of what we do. We actually already do too much stuff. The issue is much more around the quality. So I'm going to examine a campaign that we did last year around the Rugby World Cup. Why? Because it had many of these scientific principles embedded within it. Yes, it had a pretty significant budget associated with it, but that's not the point. Yes, it had TV advertising at its core. And I know in B2B that's rare. But again, that's really not the point. For me, the point is the approach that we took and the mindset that we took. And that's what I find interesting and that I'll try and develop. Because I believe this approach is one that we all can be applying to any campaign that we're doing. It's not rocket science. then I'd be a rocket scientist. I'm a marketing scientist. It's not rocket science. And I know many of us in the room are doing lots of this sort of thing already. It's only common sense and a degree of rigour. But I know also that most of us probably in the room aren't doing as much of this as we think as we know we should be. So, in its essence, I think this is really about a scientist's drive to understand behaviour. It's about, as Neil said, a lot of it is around personal leadership, I think, as well. It's also about planning up front, even when, as you'll see in this example, up front is not a huge amount of time. So let's skip on quickly through this chart. When we say marketing, in IBM, we think of marketing in three ways. There's the classic bit on the far right-hand side around capturing markets, generating demand, those types of things. That's where we talk about marketing automation, sales and marketing alignment, all those sorts of notions. And of course, that's where we do all the metrics about ROI and cost per lead and all that sort of stuff. In the middle, there's another key role that marketing has, which is really trying to set the stage for the next 3 to 5 years. Right? So that might be in terms of making new markets by geography, new markets by category. In our case, we're keen to get into the analytics space, the cloud space, conversations with marketing organisations, etc. And then on the left-hand side is the stuff that's more to do with who you are as a company, the company ethos, what's the essence of the employees of the company values, those types of things. All those three things are, if you like, core functions within our scope of what we see as marketing being within IBM. This campaign is very much really in the middle of this set. It's much more around the making of a market around business analytics. So consequently, it doesn't have the sorts of measures that you would expect from a standard lead generation campaign. So let's get into the campaign just a little. So I'm going to explain the background to the Rugby World Cup. Who here, I just need to ask, who here are rugby fans? How many of you really felt like rugby fans if you were an England supporter during the Rugby World Cup? Yeah, it was fairly torturous, but some things we can't really control. So I'll give you a little bit of the background from a sponsorship point of view of the rugby campaign. We'll talk about what we created, but I won't dwell on that for too much. And then we'll move on to really looking at how we looked at trying to evolve the campaign real time through the life of the campaign and what we learned. So first of all, let's talk about the offer. So the offer was fundamentally a conversation with ITV, who had picked up the broadcast rights for the Rugby World Cup last year to show every game live for the first time. Previously it had been on the BBC channel. So the proposition from them was, in exchange for a small amount of money, we would have the opportunity to show idents, which are or bumpers, which are the things that go at the beginning and the end of every advert break, very short, snappy pieces, not a conventional long-form advert. So we'd have the opportunity to have those idents during every live game, and indeed during the highlights packages. And there was parts of the sponsorship around web properties and around mobile investments that they were making as well. From our point of view, you might ask, why would we be considering a sponsorship around rugby? And actually it goes to Neil's point really, is that the business customer is a consumer too. When we do the indexing for the target C-suite audience that we're after, rugby is far and away the best indexing sport for that audience, and I think the representatives in the room indicate that too. So, from our perspective, it addresses an audience we were very keen to get to from a brand perspective. From a commercial perspective, I have to say the commercial proposition was very compelling. We would probably have taken standard IBM TV advertising and placed it in some of the live matches anyway, but actually through this sponsorship, we saw a very good commercial possibility to actually get really good value as a straight media buy, frankly, at the end of the day. And we also felt that we could actually make some linkage between the sport of rugby and data and business analytics, which was a market space that we're extremely interested in. But with it came a few challenges, not least of which was the fact that this was purely a commercial operation, a commercial sponsorship. There was no IBM technological involvement in the running of the World Cup or in the execution of the ITV sites or anything like that. Unlike things like Wimbledon, where we are deeply embedded in the infrastructure of the whole organisation. So that was going to limit, to some extent, what we could do. It would require totally new creative. IBM had never done these idents before, anywhere in the world. So that was going to be fresh for us. So we normally are in the business of adapting creatives that have come out from New York. This was going to be completely new for us. And you can imagine, particularly those of you who work in large multinational companies headquartered in the US, you can imagine the degree of skepticism with some of my colleagues at Worldwide who had to go through the motions of approving, frankly, every step of this campaign for a sport that they didn't understand, in a language that they could barely recognise, etc., etc. So there were some challenges around that. But then probably one of the biggest challenge of all was from signing the contract, we had 6 weeks to get into market here. So, end of July, we signed the contract. We had nothing in place. Well, we had some things in place. I had a 2-week holiday in place. Our lead account director at our agency, Ogilvy, had a 1-month sabbatical in Australia in place. There was an August bank holiday coming up. It was the main holiday season for everyone in the team. So there was a few logistical challenges. We didn't, I stress, we didn't cancel any of that stuff, but that was going to present some challenges for us. Plus, as I said, every step of the way, from concept, casting, script, edit, we'd have to actually take through our colleagues at the worldwide level just to check that we weren't doing anything naughty. So to pull off this at all was something that was just going to require 100% commitment from everybody involved. And we had an interesting discussion before lunch, around outsource and whether to do things in-house. I think this was a superb example of great partnership between ourselves as the client, Ogilvy as our creative agency, Neo on the digital elements of it, and Mindshare on the media purchasing side, all with very clear alignment of all wanting to point in the same direction, and a really good example of partnership working really well. And we would have been completely dead without it. I suppose the other part of the partnership relationship is the client, so our role was, I guess, overall direction and meddling was the way that I'd put what we do. So faced with this aggressive schedule and a significant set of challenges, it was essential for us to visualise, first of all, well, what was success going to look like? How were we going to measure it? Because in a company like IBM, I do need to measure things quite a lot, as you would expect. And actually, given that we were taking such a risk in doing this in the first place, it was going to be very important to be able to demonstrate success. So as I say, it's not lead generation, so we weren't using lead generation types of metrics, but in branding, there are branding types of metrics we can use as well. The most obvious one that we would use on most advertising would be pre- and post-campaign research that you do out in the field to establish, were people aware of the sponsorship? Did they like the sponsorship? Did they connect it with the brand? Did it influence their future intent, their recommendation propensity, all those sorts of things? So yes, we wanted to do that and measure the association, how people associated IBM with helping them make decisions. But of course, that was going to take time. I mean, you can't do the post-campaign analysis until you've done the campaign. So we weren't going to get any of that sort of data until well after the campaign had executed. So I really wanted to have a second set of metrics that was going to be much more dynamic and much more useful to me in terms of influencing the campaign. So I wanted to know what engagement we were generating around that IBM sponsorship. So, the concept here was track everything that moved, look at all the traffic drivers, look at the subsequent engagement, having brought people to the various sites and endpoints. And this, of course, was going to give me the opportunity to change things during the campaign. So the Rugby World Cup runs for 6 weeks. That's a nice long-length campaign. It was also, if you like, from an audience perspective, a much bigger campaign in terms of exposure than we would normally have in the B2B environment. So given this fantastic potential sandbox to play in, why wouldn't I, if I could, want to experiment with doing as many different things as possible. So that was the intent, and then to measure the impact of that. Clearly, if the results all proved extremely positive, we'd do lots of presentations and stuff around it. If the results actually proved somewhat less than positive, then we'd do what any self-respecting marketer would do, which is just completely bury them. So, so I guess you get the end of the story already. So, so let's now move to the creative idea. A couple of sketches here from the creative guys when this is now early August, when they were just starting to look at how can we represent this proposition into a short form ident that is 5 seconds or 10 seconds or 15 seconds tops. So that's very short period with which to make any sort of a message. You can't develop a strong narrative during that sort of time. But they got to work, and the recommendations were to forge a link between business data and the rugby fan in a somewhat playful manner. How could, if you like, smarter data allow a passionate sports fan to have articulate conversations instead of the normal opinions that we express down the pub on the topic of rugby with well-informed insights? So rather than talk about it, let's just show you a couple of examples for those of you who didn't see him last summer.
What would you like?
I'd like us to start scoring more tries.
Historically, the team who score most tries win 85% of matches. It's a peculiarity of the game that's just not hold true in finals.
And a large stuffed crust of wine.
Smarter data for a smarter planet.
ライアンはトライなのに 10% だけだからキックで3点狙え。
You're not wrong, Jeff.
Smarter data for a smarter planet.
They spent 49 minutes and 38 seconds in their opponent's half. They never.
Smarter data for a smarter planet.
And then she said if they don't start winning over 75% of their own line-out ball, they might as well go home. Oh, the nerve of that woman.
Smarter data for a smarter planet.
46% possessions kicked.
64%.
Oh, right. No, it's 64%. Do you still want it? Yeah?
Smarter data for a smarter planet.
So you get the idea. So and you can imagine the fun conversations I had with our New York office trying to explain what they were saying it about, and whether it actually made any sense, whether it was remotely funny. It was if I'd recorded some of those conference calls, they would have been worth rebroadcasting themselves, but there you go. So there were 14 of these idents that were filmed, 14 that were filmed and edited over an August bank holiday weekend last year, all leading to a smarter data landing page. I won't go through the pre and post campaign research today, as I really want to focus on the engagement activities, but suffice to say it performed astonishingly well. The awareness of the sponsorship was almost double what would normally be expected for sports. 2 out of 3 viewers recalled the sponsorship, 4 out of 5 liked the sponsorship, and we saw significant uptick in terms of the likelihood of people to recommend IBM amongst the people who'd viewed the sponsorship. So from that perspective, that was good, but we didn't know that at that time, right? Because that happens afterwards. So for me, though, the far more interesting part of the campaign, and for all of us, is the elements beyond the TV creative that were aimed at establishing just greater engagement and looking at how we and I could derive insight from some of that data. So let's charge through some of the campaign surround elements, because there was a lot of stuff. And you'll see that there was lots of things that we could measure and that we could gather learnings from. And with this sandbox, as I say, that was my intention, was let's do as much experimentation as possible. So what did we have around it beyond the offline TV? So this again links to Neil's talk, I think, in as much as all this, the rest of this stuff is all digital and is therefore measurable. So we will get stats on the TV ad performance some weeks after the campaign, but actually during the campaign, we can actually get a lot of digital insight as to how the campaign's performing. So, number of different elements. We had, as you'd expect, we had a bunch of banner ads. Some of these were Rugby World Cup specific. Others were more generic with just a straight IBM business analytics message. These appeared extensively across the ITV website networks and some other places also. And then on the right-hand side, within our own websites, we had significant amounts of content on our owned media as well. Within the ITV website, we had, as part of the sponsorship package, there was a content page that we put materials and verbiage and white papers into. There was also a fairly trivial competition page a couple of weeks into the campaign as well. From a digital or mobile perspective, there was ITV produced a an iPhone, iPad app so that you could watch the broadcast. Remember, this was all down in New Zealand, so the timings of the games was like early morning before breakfast. So it was envisaged that actually an awful lot of people would end up watching these on mobile devices on the way into work or you know, whilst the family's getting up or what have you. So they had an iPad, iPhone app, so you could watch the broadcasts live, or you could watch catch-up on there as well. And all of these assets had extensive IBM branding around the app itself, and then as you went into the video, there was clickable branding into the video feeds as well. Then, as you'd expect, we took the TV spots, we put them onto YouTube, we leveraged ads that we placed out through Facebook, through LinkedIn, etc. And of course, we did an SEO campaign around it and search word campaigns with all the major platforms. Again, nothing that you kind of wouldn't expect, I suspect, then. And then internally, so we've got 20,000 people work at IBM in the UK, so the internal audience is a significant one for me in terms of if I can get a percentage of those people carrying my message onto their conversations as well with our clients, then that's very relevant. So we ensured that our colleagues were kept up to speed with the campaign as it unfolded. And in actual fact, some of the campaign results we were sharing with our colleagues through our newsletters and such like through the 6 weeks, just to give them some news to pass on to the customers. And we did some, frankly, fairly primitive social media stuff. I would have really liked to have done a little more, but without there being a real strong IBM technology angle in the story, it was a little difficult to engage in this specific campaign from a social media perspective. However, we did do, we promoted the activities we were doing around Twitter. We encouraged our colleagues, through the internal mobilization, we encouraged our colleagues to tweet also, and provided them with some pre-canned tweets for them to hopefully adapt and use. Something I was actually a little sceptical about, but we'll talk about that in a little while. So there was a lot of stuff. But there were two questions, really, that I was looking to answer. And two questions were these. At the first level, are we driving people to our site? And if so, what of all of those things is working? What could be improved? And what should be downweighted because it's frankly not working? And having got them to our site, that's not the end of the journey. We want to know, having got them there, did they engage with the content that we provided? So, what can we do through the life of the campaign to maximise that engagement? But the question then becomes, how do you answer those questions relatively easily? Well, the answer was really quite simple, and as you'll see in a second, I couldn't go to a single dashboard in one of our tools and actually get the answers to all of those questions across everything. I could get elements of it. So actually, we ended up drawing a picture just like this. So we actually took all those elements that I just laid out for you, put them all onto a piece of paper, and then asked ourselves, so we had the ITV elements, we had the social media elements, we had the banner elements, the IBM elements, etc. And then we just, whoops, the daisy, we go forwards. Then we just very simply sort of said, from a client experience point of view, from a customer journey point of view, if someone clicked on that banner, where would it take them? And then when they went to that site, what were the options that could take them a little bit deeper? So really straightforward, but actually visually, whilst not visually pretty, but visually straightforward to comprehend how did the campaign glue together. And having prepared this in the days leading up to the campaign launch, our next step, of course, was to put numbers onto those arrows. So how many visitors arrived at each route, what were the click-through rates, that kind of stuff. So, oops-a-daisy. So most of this data came from our Unica Net Insight Web Analytics program that we use internally. But as I say, not all of it, because some of the data was data about how people were navigating through the ITV site. So some of that data we actually agreed for ITV to provide to us directly, because we wanted to get a flavour of how that was influencing things. And actually some of the data was deduced. For instance, we took the total number of visitors to the page, just down the bottom right here, which is ultimately the destination we were trying to drive people to, and subtracted from that total number, the number of visitors from YouTube, from the mobile app, from the competition, from the iPlayer catch-up, and from Facebook and Google and LinkedIn. Take one from the other, and we still had about 6% of our overall traffic numbers were left unaccounted for. Or in fact, they weren't unaccounted for. We deduced that really what that was people seeing the TV advert, seeing the URL that was on the TV advert, and actually typing that directly into a browser. So that, in a sense, was pretty novel for us, because for the first time, we can make a direct connection between engagement and what is essentially an offline media. So that was fairly interesting. So one of the nice things, though, about this whole campaign, or about the Rugby World Cup itself, rather, than the schedule, was that the big matches were at the weekends. In the early days, the big matches were centred around Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And that meant, on a Monday morning, I could get the team together, the agency and ourselves, and we could actually look at the results from the weekend that had just gone. And we could stare at all of these numbers, and we could make some decisions on what we were going to change for next week based on those insights. And then the next big weekend would come up, and then we'd keep on that roll. So we started to see some interesting things. We started to see that 40% of the visits were coming from a mobile device to this site, or mobile and tablet device, to be fair. We saw that the ITV app was responsible for 30% of the overall visitors to our landing page. 15% of the traffic came through Facebook. And the Pizza Man advert was the most popular one that we had on YouTube, just if you're interested. But I know everyone has their favourite. But beyond the simple numbers, I think it gave us some insight to actually make some decisions on what we could change. So, for instance, we noticed in the first couple of weeks that some of the search didn't seem to be performing as we might have anticipated. So just having a simple view, maybe we could dive down into that and change the search strategy on it. We could see which of the banner creatives were performing well and which less well. So that the sponsorship ones were actually working for us much better than the more generic ones, so we downweighted some of those. So that's getting people to the site. But we were equally keen to understand, having got them there, what were they engaging with. Now, this is not, I'm not claiming this is the world's perfect web landing page. It's kind of stuffed full of content, but that's because of the sandbox mentality, I think, that we were in. So there's a lot of potential content options on this page. But as you'd expect, we would track every one of them. So, I could see whether people were engaging with video, with white paper, linking off to other sites, etc., etc. So we saw, for instance, that the videos on the left-hand side of the page here performed much better than the ones that we had running along the bottom. So we could play around with rotating some of the content there to see how much was positioning and how much was the content that was in the video. We saw that the MTEs, the modules on the right-hand side, were driving a significant amount of content. We only had one the first week, so we upped the number of those and could see that we actually brought that whole load of extra new engagement on the back of that. We explored implementing polls on the site as well to increase the engagement also. So I think this combination of looking at the traffic sources and then looking at some of these basic engagement metrics allowed us to really piece a couple of things together and make some quite interesting, I think, discoveries for ourselves. For instance, I wanted us to evaluate in this campaign or for thinking about future campaigns, how useful was Facebook ads as a medium for us compared to LinkedIn ads. And the first data I saw was cost per click data that came through from the agency. And if you look at that, then that sort of says cost per click on Facebook in this specific campaign. Obviously, it all depends on the different attributes that you put into the placement and stuff. But the cost per click for Facebook was significantly lower than the cost per click for LinkedIn. So interesting, I thought. But then I thought, that's actually not the question I want to answer. Because I'm not really interested in clicks. I'm interested in, are they the right clicks? Are they people who actually then land on my site and then want to engage? So we then challenged the team to sort of say, can we turn this into a cost per engagement type of a measurement instead? So what we did then was therefore track those Facebook users, how many of those then went engaged in one of those elements. We looked at the LinkedIn users, how many of those engaged in what elements, and then performed a very rudimentary cost per engagement measurement on the back of that. And as may not surprise you, you then start to see that for this specific campaign, that the cost per engagement for LinkedIn was way, way better than for Facebook. So good example, actually, I think, in this data world of sometimes if you actually look at one data point, you can draw one conclusion, but unless you understand what it is you're looking at, you can actually draw the wrong conclusion if you're not careful. So on this whole engagement thing, I know some. I know before lunch we were talking about the benefits of insourcing and outsourcing stuff. So I know some marketers would view that all this measurement stuff is something I'll just outsource to the agency. I worry about that. I see a risk, in my experience, of when we do that, there's a very strong risk of this becoming a reporting exercise, as opposed to what I wanted was this to be an exploration exercise to allow us to make decisions. So it was going to need focus, and it was going to need leadership from within my team to actually make some decisions as to some of the things to change. And it was going to need a degree of passion, I think, coming out of our team as well. So I think even if the agency is able to produce the numbers that you need, my clear recommendation would be that the client really must lead the process and invest the time and the energy and the passion to understand some of that data so you can ensure that you're making the right decisions. And in many cases, in my case, frankly, the agency doesn't have access to some of the data about some of the traffic movements once you get into the IBM domains, so wouldn't be able to form a complete picture even if we asked them to. So, as you've seen, myself, my team, the agency, I think we all learned a considerable amount through this campaign by taking what I think are really some fundamentally simple, straightforward steps that we all know we should do, but I challenge you as to how many of us do as regularly as we should. And we've applied the same mindset to subsequent campaigns. So here I've put some personal highlights, positive and a couple negative, that I'd like to share that I hope may be of value to some of your campaigns, be they demand generation campaigns or focused on making new markets as this one, or promoting your corporate character. First learning or reminder, if you like, was that the advertising itself is not a campaign. It's a bit of creative, right? It's the bits you wrap around it that turn it into a campaign. And exactly the same applies to other activities. An event is not a campaign. It's what do you do before, what do you do after. That's where these things really count. Measurement. As anybody in my team will tell you, I have a bit of a passion for measurement, not from a inspection point of view, quite honestly. That gets a bit dull, but we have to do that sometimes. But my passion for measurement is because I want to understand, and I want to learn, and I want to make decisions on it. So from a measurement perspective, we saw that getting the whole team focused on regular metrics reviews every week on this stuff through the life of the campaign really helped us keep focus, really helped us drive change, and actually became a little bit addictive for everybody in the team, some of which were not, would never have said they had data and metrics in their DNA. But after a while, it comes up and it grabs everybody. So if it's not in the DNA of yourself or in your team, to some extent, I think going forward as marketing scientists, we need to make it so, at least to some degree. And we need to keep ourselves, it's not just the data, we need to keep asking ourselves questions of the data, like, what does this actually tell us? What decisions can we make on the back of it? What should we be doing differently? And on this whole measurement thing, again, I think partnership with the people who actually have the data at their disposal is critical, because you may not have access to all the data that you need. And of course you need to be pragmatic, because you may not be able to get access to all the data that you'd like. On the search perspective, I think the integrated approach we took to some of the search and social media channels, display networks, Facebook, etc., provided some encouraging results. But if I was doing it again, I think I'd do some of it a little bit different. I think we found that we were getting a little bit frustrated with some of the maturity of the metrics that we had access to in the time that we had allowed to set this up. I'd recommend that we all keep challenging. This is not me having to go at agencies, but I'd recommend we all keep challenging some of the recommendations we get back from our agencies, just to poke at them a little bit more, just to make sure that we understand, are we getting the right recommendations, or is it just something that's a little bit too superficial? My big learning out of that was this whole CPC thing. We need to understand cost per good click, not just cost per click, and that's not always straightforward. On the social media side, the pre-canned tweets, we actually have made these available for significantly more campaigns since then. As I say, I was very sceptical about using pre-canned tweets, because it felt to me, putting those out there is kind of like against the spirit of social media. That's all supposed to be about, authentic and all the rest of it. However, the feedback I got from people was, from people out in the field particularly, was, I tell you what, I'd like to help amplify this campaign or this conversation just a little bit, but I'm not that comfortable with social media just right now. I know I should be, but anything that you can do that just helps me get started. So if it gives me a little link and it gives me some words that I can actually then put into my own personality, then that really helps. So that was useful feedback for me. I got that one wrong for sure. I think we couldn't really do it on this campaign, but on future campaigns, we want to focus more on the social media from a content and experts perspective. So, now increasingly, when we're building a campaign, as part of that campaign planning, we recruit experts from within the company that we can use within the social media activities to continue the campaign. And I think we certainly recognise that we need to make some local investments around some listening tools. So whilst there's a good deal that you can get with all the free tools, with TweetDeck, with Hootsuite and all the rest of it, I think increasingly we know that we want to get a little bit more sophisticated than just that, and we're now implementing that too. But for me, it just also comes down to just some of the most simple things, just plotting the customer web journey, which, when you look in some of the tools and try and do it, some of these tools, claim to try and do it, often it can just look a little bit dry and a little bit difficult for a normal human being to actually to visualize. Just putting it onto a simple picture really helped us and helped keep everyone really, really focused. But I think if I learned anything from this whole project, I think it's that as marketers, we need to think differently. Social media, web analytics, web reporting suites, they're tools. Marketing science, for me, is a mindset. So someone needs to take charge. Someone needs to be comfortable to get down into that uncomfortable detail. I certainly had the motivation in this case because there was enough people around my organisation who were not so keen on me doing the campaign in the first place, so it was very critical for me that I was going to be able to demonstrate with some data that it had been an outrageous success. I think as it was Samuel Johnson who famously said, when a man knows he is to be hanged in a fortnight, it concentrates his mind wonderfully. And that's kind of like how I felt through this. So, but for a scientist, the journey never ends. So results tracking that we were doing here was perhaps getting towards real time, but the creative absolutely wasn't. The creative was completely pre-canned. Would have been lovely, but of course we didn't have the technology behind it in this case. On the IDM LinkedIn pages last week, I say IDM, it's very easy, IDM, IBM. On the IDM LinkedIn pages last week, I started a conversation looking for some examples of real-time creative that some of you guys have done out in the marketplace or observed in the marketplace. So you might want to go have a look at that if you're looking for some inspiration on what some people are doing with live chat and other things to make their creatives more dynamic. One of the things I love about our profession is that we're all on a continual journey of discovery and improvement. So we're now looking at how we can integrate data more into our campaigns. Let me just touch on this one for a second. The first one, sorry, was kind of not so relevant. The one on the right-hand side, Leicester Tigers, just anyone who's interested in rugby again. So Leicester Tigers are now putting sensors into the shirts of the team, tracking all the analytics whilst they're going through training so that they can better predict potential injuries and such like. And for them it's really important because they don't have the budgets that some of their European competitive rugby teams have. They don't have the squads that some of those teams have. So it's really important for them to use that data to actually predict upcoming injuries and such like. The left-hand side picture, though, is Wimbledon. And, of course, the end of next month is the Wimbledon Championships again. And IBM's been associated with that for over 20 years now. And we do have the technology there. We provide the infrastructure. We provide the scoring systems for John McEnroe to make him seem clever and all these sorts of things. So one of the things we do at Wimbledon, we introduced last year, is something called Slam Tracker, which takes the analysis. If you take, if Nadal is playing Federer, it takes their last 5 matches from Grand Slams around the world, and using SPS analytics, it calculates what were the 3 key factors that determined the outcome of that match, and uses that to predict forward to say, what's if Federer has the completes 60% of his first serves and has so many aces and has no more than X number of double faults, all other things being equal, so it's not actually a straight prediction, but all other things being equal, chances are he would win. So we're going to take some of that data, or we're looking at how for our Wimbledon campaign we take some of that data and serve that live into our actual creative for this year. So keep an eye out for that over the next few weeks coming to a railway station near you. It just might be kind of interesting. So finally, before we get too carried away with web analytics and social media listening tools and the like, I wanted to close with some advice from an eminent marketing scientist who reminds us that science and also marketing, but science needs ultimately not just to focus on tools, but to focus on providing value to humans rather than just serving our own ends. So 80 years ago, addressing a group of students in Pasadena, Einstein said this. He said that concern for man himself and his fate must always form the chief interest of all technical endeavours, in order that the creations of our mind shall be a blessing and not a curse to mankind. Never forget this in the midst of your diagrams and equations. So that's me. I'm Pete Jakob. I'm proud to call myself a marketing scientist, and I hope you are too. Thank you very much.